judges and justices, the justices of the Warren Court did not simply impose that vision on society. To the contrary, even the Warren Court's most controversial decisions had deep roots in American law and traditions. Today, especially, it is important to see that these criticisms of the Warren Court are wrong. Since 1969, the Supreme Court has become increasingly conservative. In this environment, the notion that the rulings of the Warren Court were examples of excessive judicial activism that were not based on law is especially toxic. That line of criticism opens the door to conservative claims that conservatives alone are truly committed to the rule of law, that the decisions of the Warren Court were the product of the justices' political opinions or fuzzy liberal sentiment, not real law. It rationalizes aggressively conservative judicial decisions as a necessary corrective, or as some self-identified moderates might say, an understandable reaction to the supposed liberal excesses of the Warren era. All of that is wrong. The Warren Court's decisions, unlike, it should be said, many decisions of the conservative courts that followed it, were principled, lawful, and consistent with the spirit and fundamental values of our Constitution. Democrats with a small d. The Warren Court's vision at its core was deeply democratic. The Warren Court's critics, including many sympathetic critics, often portray the court's members as judicial imperialists who simply took over policymaking from elected representatives. But that is not what the Warren Court did. Earl Warren was one of the most successful politicians of his generation, and, by the way, a Republican, and the Warren Court's most fundamental commitment was to the principles of democracy. Warren served as Attorney General of California from 1939 to 1943 and as Governor of California from 1943 to 1953. He also served as Thomas Dewey's vice presidential running mate in the 1948 presidential election. The Warren Court, for example, was conspicuously reluctant to strike down acts of Congress. The more conservative courts that followed the Warren Court have overruled very few of the Warren Court's supposedly activist decisions involving racial discrimination, criminal defendants' rights, and freedom of speech. But those conservative courts have repeatedly overruled or cut back key Warren Court decisions that gave power to Congress. If you're looking for judicial imperialists, that's where you should look, to the conservative successors of the Warren Court who have aggressively asserted the primacy of the court over elected members of Congress in a way the Warren Court never did. Of course, many of the Warren Court's greatest decisions did reject laws enacted by the states, but those decisions too reflected a deep commitment to democracy. The Warren Court acted on the premise that the role of the Supreme Court is to intervene when American democracy was not truly democratic, when some groups were marginalized or excluded and denied their fair share of democratic political power. Most important, the Warren Court protected the interests of African Americans in the Jim Crow South, who were effectively kept from voting in many places and were utterly excluded, often violently, from positions of influence. The Warren Court protected political dissidents, stating unequivocally that free and open debate is a central commitment of any democratic government. In its one-person, one-vote decisions, the Warren Court put an end to manipulative and unjustified disparities in people's ability to elect their representatives. The Warren Court acted on behalf of members of minority religious groups whose interests were disregarded by the majority, and of criminal defendants who were often also members of discriminated against minority groups and who lacked any effective voice in politics. Contrary to the critics, this was a principled and appropriate role for the Supreme Court to play. Ordinarily, the people's elected representatives should make the important political decisions in a democracy. If the courts are to step in, they must have a reason why a particular issue should not be left to ordinary democratic processes. In the cases that made the Warren Court famous, there were such reasons. That is why the Warren Court's decisions have held up over time. In an interview near the end of